Fraud alert. $18,500 charged to Royal Caribbean. I stared at the text message. My parents had just drained my life savings to pay for my sister's vacation. Only hours after my father forged my signature and sold my car to a stranger. I looked down at the crumpled $2 lottery ticket they had thrown at me during dinner as a cruel joke. I scratched off the last number. $100 million. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just tucked the ticket into my boot and checked the bus schedule. 4 hours earlier, the house on Elm Street smelled like roasted garlic and expensive perfume. It was the kind of warmth you could feel in your chest. The kind that usually means safety. But as soon as I stepped into the foyer, shaking the snow from my parka, I knew I wasn't a guest. I was the help. Who paid rent. Savannah, watch the rug. My father, Robert, didn't look up from his wine glass. He was sitting in the leather armchair I bought him for his 60th birthday, holding court with my brother, Richard. You're tracking sludge everywhere. Go around the back if you're going to look like a glorified janitor. I looked down at my work boots. I managed 3 high-rise complexes downtown. I dealt with burst pipes, difficult tenants, and million-dollar budgets. But to Robert, I was just the girl with the mop. Happy Thanksgiving, Dad, I said, my voice tight. Mia was on the sofa, surrounded by travel brochures. She looked up, glowing with that specific radiance that comes from never having worried about a bill in your life. She told me to look, claiming Richard and Mom got her the royal class package for her Babymoon. She announced we were going to the Caribbean. I froze. I told her that was expensive. It is $18,000, Richard said, smirking. He swirled his scotch. Quality costs, Savannah. But you wouldn't know about that, hoarding your pennies for that shoebox condo you're obsessed with. I told him I needed that condo. I reminded him I had been sleeping on a futon in his basement for 3 years, paying him rent. About that, my mother, Patricia, breezed in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a silk towel. She said the caterers messed up the scheduling. She needed me to handle the dishes because they were toasting to the baby, and she couldn't have dirty plates ruining the vibe. She pointed to the kitchen. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I took off my coat, leaving it draped over the banister with my phone tucked inside the pocket, and went to the sink. For 40 minutes, I scrubbed grease off bone china, while laughter floated in from the living room. I washed away the evidence of a feast I wasn't invited to eat. When I finally dried my hands and walked back to the foyer to leave, the house was quiet. They were all on the patio, lighting cigars. I grabbed my coat and walked out to my car. I pulled up my banking app just to check the pending deposit for my condo. I liked looking at the number. $24,000. 5 years of overtime, skipped lunches, and secondhand clothes. It was my exit strategy. I tapped the screen. The number wasn't there. Balance, $0. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. I refreshed the page. A single transaction. Processed 20 minutes ago. Instant transfer to R. Bennett. Richard. I texted my mother, my fingers shaking so hard I could barely type. I told her my account was empty and that Richard took the house money. Her reply came 3 bubbles later. She told me not to be dramatic. She said Richard needed liquidity for a business opportunity and was investing it for the family. She wrote that I didn't need a house because I lived at work anyway, and told me to stop being selfish. Selfish. I sat in the cold car, the word echoing in my skull. For 20 years, that word had been their leash. I closed my eyes and saw the memory they had planted there. I was 8 years old, wheezing in a hospital bed with severe asthma. My father sat beside me, weeping, telling me he had to sell the family farm, his legacy, to pay for my surgery. He told me he sold his soul to save me. I carried that guilt like a stone in my gut. I worked, I paid, I fixed. I stayed silent because I owed them my life. I let them bleed me dry because I thought I was paying back a debt of blood. But then I remembered the text Aunt Marge sent me last year. The one I tried to forget. She told me my dad didn't sell the farm for my asthma. She said he lost the deed in a poker game 3 months before I got sick. And he just needed an excuse to tell my mother. The realization hit me harder than the cold. There was no debt. There never was. I wasn't a burden they sacrificed for. I was the scapegoat they sacrificed. They broke me back then to keep me compliant. But today, sitting in a frozen car with $0 to my name, they made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was still the little girl who believed the lie. I put the car in gear. I didn't go back inside to scream. I drove away. They wanted my money? They could keep it. I was about to take something much more expensive. The motel room cost $49 a night, and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. I didn't care. It had a lock. I taped the waterproof pouch containing the lottery ticket to the underside of the toilet tank. It was the oldest trick in the book, but effective. I slept in my clothes, waking up every hour to check the bathroom. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the adrenaline had settled into a cold, hard focus. I wasn't just leaving. I was going to war. I walked into the glass-walled office of Sterling & Associates at 9 o'clock sharp. I looked like a wreck, wearing the same clothes as yesterday with dark circles under my eyes. But when I placed the validated lottery claim receipt on the mahogany desk, Mr. Sterling sat up straighter. Money has a way of fixing your appearance. I told him I wanted to claim the winnings anonymously. But first, I needed him to handle a real estate transaction regarding my parents' home on Elm Street. Sterling typed into his computer, his face bathed in the blue light of the monitor. He frowned. He asked if I was sure I wanted to buy the property, noting that it was distressed. I asked him what he meant. He explained it was 30 days from a sheriff's sale. Foreclosure. The bank had initiated proceedings 3 months ago. The heir left the room. They weren't just greedy, they were drowning. They stole my $24,000 not to fund a vacation, but to keep the lights on for 1 more month while pretending to be royalty. The cruise was a lie. Everything was a lie. I told him I didn't want to pay off the mortgage. I told him I wanted to buy the rights. I wanted to control the property before the bank took it. Sterling nodded slowly. He suggested setting up a shell company called Nemesis Holdings. He said we could approach them with a cash-for-keys deal, buying their equity and possession rights directly. He explained it was faster than a bank sale and would stop the foreclosure record from hitting their credit immediately. He said they would see it as a lifeline. I told him to do it, but I said I needed one more thing. A fraud report. I pulled out my phone. My hands didn't shake this time. I dialed the fraud department of my bank, put it on speaker, and looked Sterling in the eye. I told the operator I needed to report an unauthorized wire transfer of $24,000. I explained it was initiated from a device that wasn't mine. I said I wanted to press charges, and I wanted the receiving account frozen pending investigation. The operator said they could do that. She explained that if the receiving account was within their network, they would place a temporary hold on all funds immediately. I hung up. It was the first domino. By reporting the theft as criminal fraud, I wasn't just getting my money back. I was freezing their liquidity. In 48 hours, their cards would stop working. Their bank accounts would be locked. They would be stranded in a freezing house with no money, no credit, and no car. I stood up and told Mr. Sterling to draw up the papers. I wanted to be their landlord by the end of the week. I walked out into the biting wind. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was the architect of their ruin. 2 days later, Minneapolis shut down. The blizzard that had been threatening the skyline finally broke, burying the city under 2 feet of snow. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the thin windows of my motel room. But inside, I was warm. I can't say the same for my family. I unblocked their numbers at 9 o'clock in the morning. My phone immediately convulsed, vibrating across the cheap laminate table as 48 hours of panic flooded in all at once. Richard texted me a slur, saying his card got declined at the liquor store and demanding to know what I did. Mia texted, saying the heat was making a weird noise, and Dad said they couldn't call the repair guy because the joint account was locked. She told me to fix it immediately, because she was freezing. My mom left a voicemail telling me to pick up. She said the bank mentioned a fraud hold and my name. She demanded I call them to say it was a mistake, because Richard was losing his mind. She complained they were cold and asked how I could be so selfish. I sipped my coffee, watching the snow pile up against the glass. The fraud report had done exactly what Mr. Sterling promised. When a bank suspects a compromised device or identity theft within a family network, they don't just reverse one transaction. They lock everything associated with the suspicious parties until the investigation clears. Richard's accounts, my parents' accounts, anything touched by that transfer was now a brick. They were trapped in a drafty, aging house in the middle of a historic blizzard, with no credit cards, no cash, and a failing furnace they couldn't pay to fix. It was time to throw them a lifeline. Or rather, a noose disguised as one. I opened my laptop and drafted an email. I didn't send it to just one of them. I copied the whole family. I kept the tone submissive, apologetic, the tone of the daughter they remembered. I wrote that I was staying at a motel trying to clear my head and realized I overreacted. I said I knew they were just trying to help Richard invest, and that I shouldn't have reported the transfer. I promised to call the bank tomorrow to drop the charges. But then I dropped the bait. I told them the workplace harassment suit I filed last year finally settled. I said it wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. I told them I knew the house was underwater, and about the foreclosure notices they hid. I said I wanted to save them. I offered to buy the house for $2 million, paying off the debt and leaving them with almost $1 million in cash to start over. Plus, since the heat was broken, I told them I had arranged for a 3-month stay at the Four Seasons downtown in the presidential suite block. I said I would cover it all, while they house hunted. The only condition was timing. I claimed my lawyer said we had to close the sale tonight before the tax year cutoff or I would lose a huge chunk of the settlement. I told them the house needed to be vacant by 8 o'clock that evening so my insurance adjusters could get in. I hit send. I knew exactly what would happen. They wouldn't ask why the house was worth 5 times its market value. They wouldn't question the sudden workplace settlement I'd never mentioned before. They wouldn't care that I was overpaying. They would only see what they always saw. Savannah the fixer, cleaning up their mess. Savannah the doormat, apologizing for being robbed. And most of all, they would see the money. $2 million and a luxury hotel suite. It was the golden parachute they believed they were entitled to. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Robert. He said they accepted. No hello. No apology. Just the greedy snap of a jaw closing around the bait. He told me to bring the papers, and that they would be ready. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Wells Fargo Center was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling glass, polished mahogany, and a view of the whiteout blizzard consuming the city below. But my family wasn't intimidated. They were salivating. They walked in at 5 o'clock sharp, shaking snow from their coats, looking like royalty who had temporarily been inconvenienced by the weather. Robert slapped Mr. Sterling on the back as if they were old golf buddies. Patricia hugged me, her perfume cloying and sweet. She whispered that she knew I'd come around because family always takes care of family. I didn't hug her back. I told them to sign because the wire cutoff was in an hour. Mr. Sterling slid the stack of documents across the table. He was perfect, steely, efficient, and utterly unreadable. He explained the quitclaim deed first, stating it transferred the title of the Elm Street property to my holding company, Nemesis LLC, effective immediately. Robert didn't even read the text. He just looked for the line that said $2 million. He signed with a flourish. Patricia signed next. They handed over the house they had lived in for 30 years without a second of hesitation, trading their legacy for a lottery ticket they thought I was cashing in for them. Next, Sterling presented the surrender of possession agreement. He explained that they acknowledged the property must be vacant as of 8 o'clock that night, and that any items remaining would become the property of the new owner. He noted they were waiving all tenant rights and eviction notice periods. Richard grabbed the pen and said it was signed. He told us they were packed, and the movers were taking the furniture to storage tomorrow. He said they would be sipping champagne at the Four Seasons by 9. I said there was one final issue. I showed them a single page and explained my accountant had flagged the $24,000 transfer to Richard. Because I was overpaying for the house, the Internal Revenue Service would audit the transaction. So we needed to classify the transfer to avoid a gift tax review. Richard asked what that meant. I told him we couldn't call it a gift because the tax penalty was 40%. Instead, the limited liability company could label it a reimbursement for property management consulting. If he signed an affidavit stating the money was payment for services, it would be a business expense and tax-free. Richard didn't see a trap. He saw a way to keep stolen money and dodge taxes. He smiled and signed, even dictating that he had advised me on asset liquidity. I watched the ink dry. He had just signed a sworn affidavit admitting to work he never performed to justify stolen funds, wire fraud, tax fraud, and perjury on one page. Sterling finalized the escrow wire. Robert tossed the keys onto the table, wished me well, and they all left laughing, headed for a luxury hotel. As the elevator closed, Sterling said he had shut down cartels, but had never seen a family sign their own destruction so happily. He called me terrifying. After they drove off into the blizzard, I made one call. A locksmith arrived, changed every lock, and disabled the keypad. I sat in my new Range Rover and waited. At the hotel, their reservations didn't exist. Their cards declined. 48 hours earlier, I had reported the fraudulent transfer, triggering a freeze on every linked account. When Richard checked the $2 million sale wire, he saw zero. The contract placed the funds in escrow for 90 days pending audit. They had given up the house for money they wouldn't receive until spring. They returned in panic. The locks didn't open. I texted the group chat. Per the possession surrender agreement, they no longer owned or occupied the property. Entry would be criminal trespass. Police were en route. The officers arrived, reviewed the paperwork, and told them to leave. They stood freezing in the driveway of the house they no longer owned. Weeks later, I stood in my penthouse. Richard had been indicted. His consulting affidavit sealed the case. My parents lived in a weekly motel. Mia's influencer career collapsed with the foreclosure records. I deleted the family group chat, poured a glass of wine, and listened to the silence. It sounded like freedom.